Hello everyone, my name is Paul. I've not given a talk at a PyCon for a good 5 years, and I've never given one in the Southern Hemisphere either, so it's quite fun to come back and to talk about the thing that I'm most enthusiastic about, which is Python. You may think, hang on a minute, this looks like a talk about JavaScript, and it's not, it's a talk about Python. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about how we at Sharesies made a React template for Flask, but also why we made a React template for Flask, because there's definitely many ways you could solve the problems we made, but given the context we have, which I'll share with you, we made the right call for what we were trying to achieve. And I'll give you the third secret true title of this talk just after I introduce myself a little bit more, because there's a little bit of context involved in where I come from and the things I care about. So who am I? My name is Paul. I am currently a technical lead at Sharesies. I've been writing software for around about 13 years now, almost entirely in Python. It's my bread and butter language. I love it. It's great. I remember coming from the world of 2.7 and onwards. And if anyone's actually gone back and looking at 2.7 code and 3.11 code, it's incredible how much has changed in that time. You can find me online at various places here, and I'm wearing a aviation t-shirt and I like aircraft, if that's not obvious. It was last week for my birthday. My partner surprised me with a flight in a World War II biplane, which is super cool. Outside of language specifics, there's two things I'm really interested in programming, and they're relevant for today. One of them is HTTP API design. And when I first left university a long time ago, I made an API called the Pokemon API, and the aim of that was to demonstrate good API design practices. But what ended up happening was people thought, hey, this is about Pokemon, it's way cooler, and they just kind of ended up consuming all the data and ignoring the true fact. But that's okay, because it helped to teach people to program. But from that, I developed a second passion in programming, which is the secret title of today's talk, which is developer productivity and developer experience. And what I want you to take away from what I'm telling you today is that when you build your software for your customers, you need to think about a second group of users, and those users are the developers, and how you build stuff for them to make their life easier can benefit the customers as well, because if the developers are having a great experience, your customers will be too. So let me dive into this talk about how we decided to build a React template for Flask and the specifics by introducing the Sharesies app. Does anyone here use Sharesies? I can give it a yeah. There's a table over there. I'm very happy, and this lot that they do, because they work at Sharesies. So we basically tried to solve like the financial market complexity for people. We have a phrase to give everyone the equal opportunities from $5 to $5 million in the financial markets and investments. We have a Kiwi saver and save accounts and stuff. And if you use the app on your mobile phone, on the web, what you're doing is you're downloading a TypeScript, which is like a typed version of JavaScript, React, which is like a framework for building, interactive single-page applications, and that's coming off of our CDN. And then what it's doing is the browser's obviously rendering it, and it's going to run that JavaScript, and it's going to make a load of API calls to our big Flask application. You probably argue that we have a monolith at Sharesies. We do mostly. It's like 95%. There's a few fringe services which are important, but by and large, day to day, our team at Sharesies are working in Python and TypeScript heavily. This kind of setup, where you have a front end separately deployed from a backend, and they talk over HTTP, very common application architecture that you probably work on yourself. But this isn't the one I'm talking to you about today. I'm only explaining this to give you a little bit of context, because you can build stuff this way, or you can build it another way, which is where we built our React template. So we have a second set of users who are not the customers. They're not the developers either. They're our internal operators. And this is some real life pictures of them, though one of them is actually a developer who's now become a pilot. And what we do to serve them is we don't serve them a React application, or we didn't originally. We served them server-side rendered HTML. In 2022, 2023, that sounds crazy to just serve plain HTML, but for a long time at Sharesies, this worked. As I said earlier, we aim to remove all the cruft of financial markets from you, the end user, but someone has to manage that still. And so these people, these operators, they do that. And for a long time, all they were really doing was just manipulating models in our database. They're updating rows as settlements occurred, a few additional functions around banks and banking and stuff like that. But by and large, they were just manipulating the data models. And for most of the time of Sharesies' life, those plain old HTML forms solved the problem. So we didn't need to do anything more. But increasingly, we did need to do more because as we scaled, their jobs got much more difficult. They were obviously having to load pages, really slow process. It wasn't this kind of modern interactive application. And so we needed to come up with a new way of serving them an application. And I'll get into that specifically once I explain to you how these basic forms worked. So I'm going to take you through the journey of the plain old HTML and then how we tried to introduce React and then how we did it with improved developer experience, which is the key killer app of the application. So Ginger 2. Does anyone here use Ginger 2? Yeah, you probably all do. If you don't use Django, even in Django, you may use Ginger 2, but if you don't use Django, you're probably using Ginger 2. It's a templating language. You provide it a bunch of data. It effectively makes a string, and then it gives you the output. And in this case, we're serving it as the content over our HTTP requests. This is a Python view function. And already, even in the early days of Sharesies' life, we started to do stuff to make life easier for developers, which would come back to benefit us when we decided to introduce the React templates as well. And that specific thing is this little decorator here. This decorator is called render HTML. You've probably seen this in your own application because you may have already written this because it feels like a common thing for people to be like, hey, I want to abstract that. I don't want to have to keep rewriting that. And what a decorator does, for those of you who don't know, is it's a function that returns a function. So this syntactic sugar that I've highlighted here, this is basically just a Pythonic way of saying when you run this function, first call the one that decorates it, and then inside that function it will call it, which is the view func there, and you can do stuff before and after here. And so I've removed it for the sake of readability here, but what we do with render HTML is we look at the name of the function, which is set customer name. We look at the file, which would be customer.py, and we say, assume there's a template at customers/set customer name.ginger, and use that with the content we return, which is a form. That HTML, pretty straightforward. The Ginger template tags here let us just render a form, and we get a form when we can modify someone's name, and they've set their name as an emoji here, and that's naughty, so they can't do that. This pattern, we call it the render HTML pattern or the Ginger pattern. Again, like I said, it solved most of our issues that we had for a very long time at Sharesies, but it was increasingly not scaling with our architecture. And there's a few reasons for that. And they pretty much revolve around Ginger. And this is not me going on about how Ginger's bad. It's fantastic for the use case that we have, but there are definitely some issues with it. One of the major issues we had is that our team was incredibly fluent in TypeScript and React and Python, but Ginger, ironically, if you're old like me, you know HTML is like a bread and butter thing, but a lot of the time, the Ginger HTML stuff felt like almost like a third language that people had to learn, and so they weren't always able to figure out what you could potentially do with Ginger, and they were copying and pasting from other examples in order to get things done, and we just weren't as fluent in it as we could be. There's also no real static analysis you could do over this, because Ginger is not specific to HTML templates. It's pretty much just like, here's a template string, throw in what you want. You can't really build around it to say, well, make sure we're passing in strongly typed things, make sure we're not passing in callables and stuff so that we don't cause, complex issues on page load where the page is loading and calling all these functions. So we were finding it quite difficult to use. And as I said previously, our operators were asking for more complex features. They are a stakeholder that we serve. And a lot of time they were saying, we want live dashboards, we want more interactivity, we want to not have to refresh the page every time we service one action on that. Can we do something more? And so we thought to ourselves, well, we already know React quite well. We are already serving these templates. Could we just modify the templates to include like a React application in them, right? Have Flask manage all the routing, have the page just run JavaScript, which just happens to be running a React application. And this kind of query and stuff happened just before I joined, and we actually decided to explore this opportunity with a few important parts of our code. Maybe I should have done it with like a bit less important things, so it was integral, but we did it with a few projects internally, and I'm going to show you how we did it, and hopefully the issues become glaringly obvious. And it's not that they were done wrong, it was just at the time we kind of paved the initial path, which was a dirt road, and then we didn't tarmac the road, to use an analogy of roads. So trying to get React working, the first thing you need to reload a bit of HTML is you need a root. And Flask is managing our roots here, so we needed a page. And the view function at the time, it just returned an empty dictionary, which, to me, that's a little bit of a bugbear. Like, I look at it and I'm like, oh, that feels like a wasted opportunity. And we'll come back to that in a minute, because it turns out it was a wasted opportunity. But what it enabled us to do is, because we're using render HTML, we now have a template file that we can address. And in that template file, when it loads, if anyone here is familiar with React, you basically just render like one HTML element, and then you replace it entirely with a JavaScript virtual application, which is bonkers if you're still used to that kind of web 1.0 world. And so the JavaScript just basically grabbed a specific file, which was hard-coded, and then it said, hey, render that file. And that file is a typed script, so it's strongly typed JavaScript React application. And then we had React running. But this isn't the end of our journey, because there's a lot of glaring issues with this here. And this is where that concept of focusing on your developer productivity and your developer experience comes into play and becomes really important. Because whenever other developers in the company wanted to kind of adopt this, they were like, oh, that looks really complex. I don't understand how to set it up. So we knew there were things to solve. And then there was also this problem with that empty dictionary, right? So a single page application like React or Vue.js or whatever, you don't just load a page and be done with it. If you're going to do that, you may as well write HTML, right? You want to do more interactive stuff. And that's exactly what this would do. It would call another endpoint to return some JSON to fill it in with. And it's like, well, can you not just do that together? And all of that API stuff, what's happening there? It was also around this time at Sharesies that we became really big fans of type hints. We're using TypeScript on the front end. We really want to introduce and adopt typing more on the back end. Who here actually uses type hints frequently, daily? Oh, that's good. Yeah, people just really against typing? No? Cool. They're serving coffee out the back already if you wanted to leave. So for us at Sharesies, typing in Python is really important, just like it is on our front end, because we're growing big, right? We have a lot of developers, we're shipping very quickly, and we need confidence about the changes we're making. We need to make sure that they're not causing issues that are unintended or we aren't aware of simply by passing in the wrong type of properties. If you come from a statically typed world, that seems like obvious to you, but if you're like me, you spent your entire time in Python, typing is kind of a we're a bit late to the show there of discovering its benefit. And we found that between these two languages, we couldn't really maintain good typing easily without a lot of manual work. So we were like, we need to kind of solve this problem as well. So could we solve it all together? And just before I tell you how we did it, well, this is a little bit faded out. My slides looks great. What we had here, hopefully you can see that. This is a kind of Paul's thumb in the air interpretation of how much effort you needed to use one of these tools versus the functionality you gained. And so for the Ginger HTML form stuff, really easy to set up, but very limited. Great for that use case. But for this half React world that we'd investigated and built a few pages in, the barrier to entry for that was very high, but you gained a lot of functionality out of it. So it was around 18 months ago, because I was going to give this talk at last PyCon, but luckily I've had an entire year to prove that this framework works okay. It was around it wasn't 2 years ago now. I joined a team called Operator Efficiency. We had a kind of funny team name called Dogs, RIP Dogs. We've all split up now into different teams. And our goal at the time was to make life for those stakeholders, those internal users, much better through automation, through improving their experience, because they're effectively fed up with just, slow loading HTML pages. So I kind of found it like a mandate almost to say, hey, we can solve all these problems here. And I really wanted to solve this bringing React to the Sharesies admin problem. And so I got together with the team and a few other people in Sharesies who were interested in this concept as well, who'd worked on that exploratory previous version. And I said, let's try and solve this, and let's do it. The previous one's called Render HTML. Let's call it Render React. And so I'm not going to talk to you through the steps of building it up. I'm going to show you how it works, the finished thing, and work backwards just to explain the key benefits that we built here. So this is what it looks like. This is a Render React page. This is a Flask root, and what it will do is it will render a JavaScript page for you using React without the developer having to touch anything manually. The server, when it's running in debug mode, will just generate it all for you. So when you want to build a new page, it's very quick and easy to do. There's a few cool things going on here that you may notice. The Render React decorator behaves exactly like the Render HTML decorator in the sense that it enforces particular templates to be in a particular place, but it does a little bit more as well. And it does stuff specifically around the return types and the input types of those view functions. This is returning a class called example page props, which subclasses a page props class, which we just fill with a bunch of useful things. And in the Render React decorator, what we do is we can actually inspect the types of our code at runtime. You can't do this in TypeScript. I'm not sure how many other languages allow you to do this, but I think this is an absolute killer feature of Python's type hints, and I really encourage you to explore what you can do with it. You pass it a callable, so like an instance or a class or a function, and it gives you back a dictionary of the input types and the output types of that callable, and then you can do what you want with that information. In this case, we call the function, which returns an instance of that class. And then again, for the sake of brevity, I've removed a bunch of code here. But what we then do is we will pass that return type object and we'll output to a string the TypeScript interface equivalent for that React page. Now you're probably thinking, if you're not used to React, what did he just say? TypeScript interface equivalent? That's complex. So let me show you some code. TypeScript React code here. So most of this, I've kind of bunged it all into one view, but this is mostly all auto-generated by the application that we've built. You'll see here that this interface looks identical to the Python one on the right-hand side, and this is just the TypeScript equivalent of it. And what I love about the Render React thing we've built here is that with this GIF, you can see as you change the things, it will just automatically update it. And I put a little delay in here, and you can see it quickly changes the interface in the file. Very cool little feature. Okay, it's just changing a thing. But basically what this is doing is it's completely removing any effort from the developer to maintain the typing between two separate languages so that they can just get on with building what they need to build. And then the React page here is also auto-generated by the Render React. When it's a brand new file view, it will be like, hey, this doesn't exist yet. I'm just going to handily provide you a template, which we can modify if we ever need to improve it. And if you're not used to a React page here, this is basically saying this is a function called page. It's got this property. Props is like the term React uses, which is just properties basically. And then we're returning an H1 tag saying hello. And this doesn't look for Ginger files. What it will actually do is it will look in a JavaScript folder and it will look for a particular JavaScript file. And as I said, it would make one by default for you if you haven't got one. Otherwise, it will take that file and it will add it to the special Ginger React file that we've got, and it will load the page. And then at that point, you've got this React application. So what we gain from that, again, I hope you can see it here, but basically, we've got pretty much the exact same functionality, but for a dramatically less effort on the developer's part. So we've made the developers' lives significantly easier by automating a bunch of stuff or automating a bunch of their workflows. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking about what I said earlier of like, you're still just rendering a JavaScript page and not doing anything with it. There's a whole load more interactivity that you want from JavaScript pages, right? Otherwise, why are you doing it? Why aren't you just using plain HTML? And that's absolutely true. We need live dashboards. We need them to be interactive. We don't want two users to clash. We want to do long polling, etc., etc. We want all that kind of functionality. The problem is, though, is that we don't want to give that to the developers and it be a wild west and then them kind of do it their own way. So we came up with a second part of this project, and I've been calling it strongly linked typing, which maybe if you hate like strong coupling, you're like, oh, that's horrible. And especially if you like typing, but I asked earlier, no one in here is against typing. You would hate this title, but let me explain. Okay, so the consumer application that we have at Sharesies is two separate deployables, right? We have to maintain the typing between the, and we do that using CI pipelines. But inherently, all of these web services that use this pattern, they have this transport layer, HTTP, that is being used in a way that it wasn't originally built for. And especially, it doesn't allow you to say, here's the shape of the objects I'm passing you, because, again, it wasn't built that way. There's a bunch of stuff that is available to try and solve this problem, like JSON schema and Open API, but it's still this kind of like fiddly, like a lot of effort to implement just to maintain the types between the two. Maybe we could just ask the developers to do it for us. The difference that we have in this application that we're building is it's not two separate deployables, right? We're running this all in one server and we're already writing stuff to a file. We don't need to do something like Open API. Could we just expand that props generator to also support our APIs as well? Could we get strongly typed API interfaces between these two languages? And the answer is yes. We managed to implement this just by extending the render React decorator to all the functions it calls is now called by these methods, these decorators here. So this is a post example. And you'll see it has input parameters and output parameters, and they're strongly typed, right? And so using this render React application, we can automatically generate the input and output types in TypeScript as well. And this is all just using the get type hints library and some string manipulation, which we've written ourselves. So that isn't the last thing we did. What we realized is we could build this, but the developers have got to actually know where to find this, right? They've got to actually, behave well and go and find that file with all those inputs and outputs, and we're going to make sure that they're actually checking those interfaces are correct when they're passing over. And it's not that we don't trust the developers, it's just that sometimes you're in a rush, you don't always know the best thing to do. So could we go one further? Could we, not just around the API layer, could we build like a whole API client that was strongly typed, maintained its changes as the developers was developing, and could ship up to production with all this safety and confidence in mind that both of the applications in Python and TypeScript had consistent types. So the last thing we did is we implemented these maps. Now these maps are effectively just a collection of all the API endpoints that we can build with this with render React. And again, this is all also generated on the server when it's in debug mode. And then we decide to wrap those maps in an API client. And so the reason I'm showing you a GIF here is because I want you to see what the autocomplete does when you're building this. So when we're calling this API client, it tells us all the functions available, and then it strongly types our inputs. And then it also gives us a strongly typed output. So the developer experience here around using the API client is also really nice because they just get all this autocomplete stuff. And for those of you who don't like GIFs, this is just the code in its finality, which is much clearer to see. So where did we get to? What did we get out of this? What was the major benefit? For my team in particular, the operator efficiency team, we were able to build a bunch of functionality that the operators needed. It was way more interactive, and we could ship it very confidently and quickly alongside the previous pages. We didn't have to completely rebuild and move to a whole new language. We could run those Ginger pages nicely when we needed to, and we could run the React ones when we also wanted to implement it. And for the developers in particular, and this is the true success, I think, is their experience of using this was really good. They loved using it, and they still do. I've shown it to a few people recently who were trying to build some admin pages for us, and now they're like, hey, there's this thing. I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, I don't need to manually write my APIs. It just all appears magically. And really what we're doing here is we're codifying our conventions. So if you work at a company now and they say, read our contributing guide, and it has all these rules about how you should be, writing things in a specific way and keeping things consistent, think to yourself, well, could we just make our software do this for us? Like, why do we need to have a human be involved? I'm not trying to get rid of humans, but why do we need a human to be involved in making those decisions when, as programmers, we know how to make things deterministic, we know how to make things functional and useful, we can build this into the systems that we're building and, serve ourselves and make our lives much easier. And just to wrap up with another graph, Paul's hand-wavy figures in the air. At the end of the day, we now have the tool at the far end and the tool at the far right for basic forms and anything more productive as well. This isn't the end of the story, though, because I'm sure some of you are thinking, that sounds really cool, I'd love to see how that works. Well, I've made an open source version. This is a template. It uses the exact same concepts. It just runs a Flask application. And as you write your view functions, it creates your React pages. You can go and have a play with this now. This isn't me being like, here's a whole new framework. What this is a template for you to look and understand about how we're doing things. And you can fork it and build off of it if you want to. You can explore the way we're doing things. And in particular, you can look at that get type hints function in Python. It's an incredible thing, and it really enabled all of this here. So have a play. The URL is just down in the corner, github.com/phalt/React Flask. That's all I got for you today. My name is Paul. I'll be around the whole conference, and if you can't find me or grab me, then you can get me online. Thank you very much.